Hello and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Michael Unbroken is an advocate for adult survivors of child abuse, an international speaker, and author. Michael has been called the Tony Robbins of trauma and spends his time helping other survivors get out of the vortex, to become the hero of their own story and take their lives back. He is the author of the book, Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma, which is available on his website or on Amazon, where it has a 4.6 star rating. The book exposes the reader to the possibility of recovery through mindset, understandings of self, and provides a guide to discover how to get traumatized life back on track. Michael also hosts the Think Unbroken podcast and blogs weekly at www.thinkunbroken.com. He is also active on Instagram at michaelunbroken. Michael, stumbled through your intro a little bit, but it's still a pleasure to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
All good, brother, and thank you very much. That is life. We stumble and we continue on.
Yeah, I don't even edit those out. It's just part of the process, so the listener will have to deal with it. It's probably your fault for accomplishing so many things that made it so difficult, so it's actually your fault.
Good. That means you have to work harder.
Well, we do an audio-only podcast. I've been told in the past that I have a face for radio. Some people have a face for radio. Other people have a voice for print. You somehow have a great face for video. You've got an amazing voice for audio, and you are also an incredible writer. That is not fair.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. That's a hell of a compliment, man. And I appreciate it, and I thank you for that.
It is very sincere. And listening to some of your content, I don't have a lot of childhood trauma in my past, but we do have a lot of weird things in common that I'm really excited to talk to you about. It sounds like we're both former gummy bear connoisseurs, if you will.
Yeah, totally, man. It's my vice, dude. I'm like, just stay away, man. Just one more hit.
I used to be the same. I've kind of learned about myself that I'm pretty much a sugar addict. And if I start down that road, I'm like you, I can't stop. But now I'm just kind of picturing the big barrels at the Sprouts down the street. There's the normal ones and the sour ones. What were your favorites?
Yeah, definitely the normal ones. What's funny is I actually like fruit snacks the most.
Oh, yes.
I would just tear these packages of these things open. I'd eat a whole box at once when I was a kid, man. Oh. Like I remember there used to be a Big Lots, which is kind of like a cheap Kmart or Target around the corner from my house. And so like I literally had to go steal food sometimes to survive. And so when you're 10 years old, what are you going to steal? Fucking candy.
Of course.
And I would go over there and I would jack a box of like fruit snacks. I'd rip open the package. I'd just stuff every one that I could into my mouth. And it'd just be like this one giant gulp of like 10 bags of fruit snacks.
Oh, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, dude. Oh, my God. It used to fuck me up so bad.
That's awesome. Dude, I love it. That's great. You have one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. And as we were kind of talking offline before we got going, you made a comment like, well, this was just my life. This is just what I was dealing with. And I think there's so much wisdom in that. We're kind of just handed these situations and we can look and compare and say one is better or worse or whatever, but we all kind of have, our own little journey in life. And I'm really curious to hear about yours and share your experience of growing up with the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 4 years old, my mother, who was a drug addict and alcoholic, she actually cut off my right index finger. And my stepfather was super abusive, the kind of guy you pray is never your stepfather. And I never met my real dad. And I spent the majority of my childhood in poverty and homeless. By the time I was 10 years old, we lived with 30 different families. When I was 12, I got high for the first time, drunk at 13. And by 15, I was expelled from school. And I was out selling drugs, breaking into houses, stealing cars, like doing crazy shit. Luckily got put into a last chance program, still didn't graduate high school on time. And they finally just handed me the diploma. They're like, you just got to get the hell out of here. We don't know what to do with you. And I was trying to figure out what was next in my life because I was going to go to the military, right? That was the out. And I hurt my knee and I couldn't pass MEPS. And so I was like, what am I going to do? There was no plan B. That was it. Because growing up, it was like, don't die, make it to the military, and then don't die in the military, right? That was the only plan I ever had. And so I was looking at my life and I was like, okay, cool. So what's actually the solution for poverty here? How do I solve trauma? How do I get out of this? And I was like, oh, it's got to be money, right? What else could it be? And so I made an agreement with myself. By the time I'm 21, I want to make $100,000 a year legally. Now, that part was super important because my uncle's in prison for life. I got family who's been to jail. I've been in handcuffs. Today, at this point, my 3 childhood best friends have been murdered, and that was all because of drugs. I foresaw the future, man. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, so I worked really hard. I ended up becoming a general manager in training for a fast food restaurant at 18 years old. I had 52 people under me. So it was a real quick jump into leadership. And then by the time that I was 20, heading into 21, I landed a job with a Fortune 10 company. No high school diploma, no college education, right? And I started making 6 figures and I reached that goal. But this thing happened. And I found myself at 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, drinking myself to sleep. And that's when I put a gun in my mouth. Ugh. I was just done, man. I was like, I thought money was supposed to solve this problem, but it didn't. It made everything worse because I hadn't done any of the work. I was still that hurt little boy who was suffering from all that abuse, all that trauma, all the chaos, all the bullying, all the being homeless, not to mention the religious trauma and all those things. And so you would think that'd be the moment. Like, okay, cool, he put a gun in his mouth then. Well, it wasn't until actually the next day. I was laying in bed. Keep in mind, man, I'm 350 pounds right now. I'm smoking a joint, eating chocolate cake, and watching the CrossFit Games. Like, man, if that's not rock bottom, like, I don't know what is. And I was like, all right, we got to do something about this. And I went and I stood in the bathroom mirror. I'll never understand why, but I looked at myself right in the eyes. And I remember being 8 years old and the water company had come and turned our water off. Now, you have to keep in mind, I grew up in Indianapolis. I grew up in a major city and we were that poor. They turned our water off. And I took this little blue bucket and I walked across the street to the neighbor's house and I turned on their spigot. And for the first time in my life, I stole water. And I was like, when I'm a grown up, this is not going to be my life. This is not going to be my life. And it wasn't, because I had money. I had a fucking $85,000 car. I had all these women. I had all this excess. And I was still that hurt little boy. And so I was like looking at myself in the mirror, having this memory. And I was like, what are you going to do about this? What are you willing to do to have the life that you want to have? And the words, no excuses, just results, just started reverberating through my brain. Well, fast forward 11 years later, here I am talking to you. Now, in this process, there was a tremendous amount of work that I had to do. Therapy, men's group therapy, EMDR, Gestalt therapy, CBT, NLP, every fucking acronym you could think of, right? I started doing things like acupuncture and Reiki and yoga and meditation and journaling. And I went to NA and SA and AA and all the anonymous groups. And then I started going to get into like this really deep dive into not only being coached and mentored, but reading personal development books, going to conferences, listening to the podcast, watching the YouTube videos, spending my money on those things. And then I started getting education. And in the education today, like, I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many I have. It's something like 35 certifications in trauma-informed education. Why? Because I was trying to figure out what the fuck was going on in my life. And then today, just because of all of that, it was meant to be, I guess, right? I don't have another way to put it. And today I'm an international speaker. I'm a best-selling author. I've been able to do some really amazing things in the world. But ultimately, I look at myself as just a catalyst. I'm just trying to end generational trauma. I just don't want another child to have to tell the story I just told you.
That is absolutely incredible. I want to go back and talk about something that you mentioned today. And you mentioned one of my absolute favorite books. It's sitting about 6 inches away from my head. And it explains the relationship that can sometimes go bad between a mother and a child. And that book is called The Truth by Neil Strauss. It is an insane story. It's hilarious. It's educational. It's all over the map. And it talks about how a parent-child relationship can go bad and how this kind of pattern perpetuates unless you stop it. And it's called enmeshment. And I wonder if you can take the listener through what that is, because I think once your eyes are open to this, you realize how persistent and common this type of relationship is.
Yeah, dude, let me tell you this. I've been on hundreds of podcasts, right? Hundreds. You're the first person to ever bring that book up. And it is hands down one of the most important books I've ever read in my entire life. Why? Because for the first time, I understood something about the relationship that I had with my mother that is incredibly uncomfortable, but also the most important and foundational understanding that I've probably ever had. And that's not only the emotional enmeshment, but the emotional incest of that relationship, right? This thing that people don't talk about, this thing that I honestly, dude, until I read that book, I want to say in 2016, it might have been 2015, whenever it came out, because I love Neil Strauss. I think he's an amazing writer. And so when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And this idea about enmeshment is like along lines with like being groomed. People kind of navigate and bend you towards what they want, right? It's in a sense, it's narcissism, it's gaslighting. It's very much this relationship that's built and predicated on my mother sacrifices everything for me. And thus, if I'm not perfect or if I don't do these things exactly how she wants, then I'm the bad son and everything's my fault. Right. And my mother was a drug addict and alcoholic. Dude, she spent our rent money on drugs. I've been evicted. Dude, we must have been evicted 15 fucking times when I was a kid. Right. And I mean, at one point, I literally lived by myself in 8th grade for 3 months. Wow. Right. While my mom was, I have no idea where, but she would always say, like, I bend over backwards for you. You don't appreciate me. And this would be to my brothers, to me, to everybody around her. Right. And look, here's one of the things I want to put into context here. She thought that was true. She thought that was true. And part of that is when you start to dive into understanding the impact of generational trauma. I looked at how my grandmother treated her and how her mother and her father must have treated her and so on and so forth. This is learned behavior. And so when I came to realize that, I was like, oh my God, this makes a lot of sense. And so understanding that and reading that book, because I'm a person that I'm super analytical, man. I need rhyme and reason. I need causation and correlation. And that book was the first time, because no one was talking about this in 2015, 2016. I'd never even heard the word before. And I was like, oh my God, this idea about enmeshment, this is being bred, this is being groomed, this is being gaslit, this is all of those things to bend who you are as a human being to the will of your parent so that you have validation, right? While also simultaneously, this is the crazy part. No matter what I did, it was still never good enough, right? No matter what I did, whether it was good or bad. I mean, I would win wrestling tournaments and come home with awards. You know, I would actually, like, at one point actually do well in school for a week and not get suspended, you know, like whatever that thing was. And it was always not good enough, you know, and eventually you come to realize, like, damn, that was her experience as a kid too.
Wow. Yeah, it's so true. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the stick figure drawings of the parent and the child? And there would be like an arrow. And it would show, like, in a normal, healthy relationship, the child should be able to go directionally to the parent for emotional support. They have that drawing. They have one drawing where the parent is reaching away from the child and moving in the opposite direction. And that would be like neglect, like you're just not there for your kid at all. And then it shows the enmeshed version where the parent doesn't necessarily have somebody they can go to, like a partner, a spouse, they maybe passed away or emotionally unavailable. And so now they use the child as their emotional support, making the child step into the parental role. It's quite crazy. And that carries on. And so what that creates is like, it's normally cross-gender. So it's not always, but normally like the daughter for the father or the boy for the mother. And then the relationship perpetuates later in life where somebody needs love and craves love. They find somebody who can step in and provide that love. And it goes amazing for like 6 months. And then all of a sudden whoever is providing all the love is getting sick of it. The person who needed the love is not getting as much. And so now the whole relationship blows up and that pattern just continues on and on. And you're right.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about this before then. And seeing that was like, holy shit, this is happening everywhere.
Yeah. And the really crazy part about it is he talks about those moments. And look, people need to go read the book because I don't think you and I will ever be able to give it the justice that it deserves.
Not even close.
Because it's one of a kind of book. And I had these, because I remembered these things happening, like my mother laying in bed naked next to me as a kid, or walking around the house with no clothes on, or passing out drunk and high into the mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving when the only girl I ever got to come to my house was there. Right. And so, you think about, I look at those experiences, I look at the emotional incest, I look at the enmeshment, and I go, no fucking wonder my relationships were a nightmare for so long. Look at the marker. This is what I had. I didn't have anything else that could prove otherwise. And so, I think this work, it's dark, right? People are going to stop listening to this right now because we're talking about it, because it's the most uncomfortable thing, really realistically, for most people on planet Earth, right? And so when you stack that and you look at the fact that, we, by nature, we move towards people based on our learned experiences that help us create safety. And as crazy as it sounds, there's safety in the chaos of violent relationships, of narcissistic, abusive relationships, of enmeshed relationships, of any type of relationship that is outside of what you would call the normative or the status quo that's based on your experience growing up. That's why people, I think it's really fascinating. I've never been in a physically violent relationship. I have been smacked in the face one time by a partner, but I promise you I deserve that moment. But I've been in multiple. When I was younger, I was in multiple relationships that they were verbally violent. They were toxic, right? And so I had to start looking at that, like, what about this? Why am I driven by this? Why is this person in connection with me? Oh, because our parents were the same. They yelled at us. They screamed at us. They yelled and screamed at each other. We didn't use kind words. We only knew how to communicate in the language that we were taught. Our nomenclature was in this verbal violence. The vernacular that we carried was full of pain. And so, of course, you're 19, 20, 25, 30, 42, 70 years old, and you're in these violent relationships because you never paused and said, well, what if I wasn't? Right? What if I did deserve more? What if I did the work to move through this? What if I put myself in a position to both be loved and give love, and, as per defined by the individual? And I think within the context of that, you have to look at your ground rules. You have to look at your boundaries. You have to look what is and is not acceptable in your life. Perfect example, man. All I ever knew growing up was being screamed at. I have a hard, fast fucking rule in my life. You are not allowed to yell at me ever. Ever, for any reason. I won't yell at you. Friend, coworker, employee, partner, I don't give a shit. No, not happening. And that will be reciprocated. You yell at me once, I'm going to be like, hey, that was the one time, like, emotions were high. If it ever happens again, I'm out. And I've held to that. Right. And so once you get an awareness of your boundaries, of your parameters of who it is that you want to be, because you've done the work, because you've dove in, because you've had the hard conversations. Like, think about this, Casey. Like, if I wouldn't have done a tremendous amount of work and you asked me this question about emotional enmeshment and emotional incest with my mother, how do you think this conversation would go? Right. Yeah. And so this is the thing I want people to understand. Like, you have to go and work through this shit. Right. Hundreds of episodes of podcasts I've been on. No one's asked me this question. I'm not on the ground in a ball freaking out right now because I've gone in and I've done the work around it. That's how you grow through these things in life. And so, we can obviously go into a deep dive into this, but I think at the end of the day, I appreciate you bringing it up because it's a conversation people just are not having.
Yeah. Wow, man. Yeah, that is so well explained. And I just want to say for the listener, if you feel like what Michael just said about setting up boundaries, if that feels difficult for you or you feel like you're not worth it, can we just please tell you that you are worth it? It is worth it to make rules and set yourself up to get out of those physical, whatever, enmeshed relationships. Get out of those. You can do that. It's totally worth it, and you are worth it. I just really want to be very clear about that.
Yeah, it'll change your life.
Yeah, totally. Dude, okay, so I'm calling you from the suburbs of Salt Lake City. We are both former members of the LDS Church, the Mormon Church. I am super, super curious about how that got involved in your life. Is that something you were born into, or were you a convert later on? Like, how did that come about?
It's indoctrination, man.
Know
Seriously.
all about it.
So growing up, I immediately only knew Mormonism. So this is my understanding of how it happened, as per my grandmother, who I don't necessarily trust, but let's go with saying that this was true. And my understanding was that my mother would jump around church to church to church and try to be in connection with people who would basically take care of her and take care of her children, and give things like pay the rent or bring food from the storehouse or whatever those things were. And so my understanding at baseline is, and looking at the nature of the way that my mother was, being very much a narcissistic person, being very much I will do whatever it takes to get my way kind of person. I think that our involvement with the church primarily started because she recognized that Mormon people are actually pretty good people and they're willing to help. Mm-hmm. And that's like a dark thing, right? And so I distinctly remember being a child at 4, 5, 6 years old going to church, right? I remember this like it was yesterday. And so, this was just part of growing up. And here's what's interesting, man. I questioned it all the time.
Really?
Because once my mom married my stepfather, and like the violence just went from 0 to 1,000. It might have been at a 2 or 3, but then it went to 1,000. And it would just be like, whoa, what the fuck is going on here? Like, we would go to church. I would get my ass kicked every day. Head slammed into doors, locked in closets, beaten until I passed out. My stepdad would literally drag us out of bed in the middle of the night and kick the shit out of my brothers and I for not doing dishes, right? Oh. We're 6, 7, 8 years old, man. We were babies. And so I would be in church and I'd be like, how the fuck is this happening? Like what is going on? You're going to talk to me about this benevolent, loving God, but I'm going to go home and might get murdered tonight, right? And so I would be in class, you'd be in Sunday school and, going and singing Popcorn Popping on the Apricot Trees for all my Mormons. You know what's up.
Dude, I was just going to ask you if every once a month out of long-term memory, all of a sudden you start humming a tune from primary, what the fuck? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, there you go, man. That's on the, you got to be in the game to get that one right there.
That's amazing.
And so, I would be in class and I would be questioning it. I'd be like, I don't understand this. Tell me why. And the more I questioned it, the more I got my ass kicked. And so I just stopped. I just was like, fuck it. I'll just have to go. You force me, you drag me, whatever. And so at about 11 years old, my mom finally started the process of divorcing my dad. Let me say this, because people will often be very disparaging and bash Mormonism, bash religions across the board, especially when they move out of them or they convert out or, whatever. And I'll say this, I saw as many good people as I did bad people in the Mormon church. When we were homeless, I lived with 30 different families over the course of 2 years. Many of those families were Mormon. Some of those people were incredible. I remember the first, dude, I swear to God, it's not even a joke. I remember the first time somebody asked me what I wanted to eat for dinner. Wow. No one had ever asked me that in my life. I was 9 years old.
Wow.
Right? I remember the first time someone ever put their hand on my shoulder and told me it was okay to cry. And it was my Boy Scout troop leader. who we also went to through the Mormon church. And that was a moment that really stood out to me because the only thing I had ever heard, if you cry, I'm going to hit you harder. Right. And so, but I also saw really shitty, terrible people. Some of my worst experiences of my life happened with being in connection with people from the church. So it goes both ways. Right. And so I'm 11 and they're getting ready to head into getting divorced. I'm living just kind of wherever at this point. And I remember picking up the Book of Mormon and I was reading it, and I can't cite the passage in its entirety, but it was something to the extent of those with the dark skin will not be allowed through the gate of heaven. And I was like, nope, I am done with this shit because I'm biracial. I'm black and white. Right. And so Irish and West Nigerian. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I am definitely done with this. And kicking and screaming through all of because they still weren't totally divorced yet. And I would like have to suffer these tremendous beatings. I'm like, I'm not going. You can kill me. I'm not going. And then shortly after that, dude, I got sick. Like I got one of the most sick I'd ever been. And I was sick a lot as a kid because as we understand, growing up in a cortisol state, your body never gets into rest and digest. You're always in the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So you never have the space to like recoup and recover. And I was so sick that without question should have been taken to the hospital. Probably knocking on death's door, right? 103-degree fever, laying in bed for 3 days, passing out, literally having hallucinations. Like I remember this as like it was yesterday. My mom calls the deacons. They come through with some fucking oils with the missionaries and they pray on me. And I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. Right. And I literally went in the kitchen. I called my grandma, took every ounce of strength I had left in my body. And I was like, you have to come take me to the hospital because this fucking psycho is about to let me die. And so maybe it was the grace of God, right? I don't know. But in that moment, those are a couple of moments leading up to that when I was like, I'm done. And so, moving through that and understanding that and getting away from it at such a young age, but then on the backside of that, being exposed to this tremendous amount of violence, right? Outside of this home, because when I moved in, when my grandmother adopted me, I was 12 going into 13, starting my freshman year of high school, because we had gotten kicked out again. Right. We had got evicted out of this apartment again. And I asked my grandmother, who already had one of my brothers, I said, hey, will you take me? And so she was finally like, yes, I don't know what else is going to happen to this boy if I don't. Right. So now I start seeing this other level of violence, right? Where my friends and I are hurting people, or we're getting hurt. Or one time my best friend, he got locked in a closet with a shotgun taped to his face. Wow. Right. Because we were doing crazy shit, man. We were doing crazy stuff. And so, I always just kind of had this war with God. And today it's just, I'm very spiritual, man. I'm just like, you know what? Do good things, be a good person, put good energy into the world, let people be people, and try to do my best. So I know that's a very long answer to your question, but I want to create a massive context for people.
Yeah, no, dude, that is fantastic. It's so funny to hear some of the stories and like totally know exactly what you're talking about, having been in both places. I had an opportunity to go back to a meeting. It was several years later, and boy, it was just the weirdest thing, man. You can just see like how it's almost like a brainwashing at such a young age, and how trapped you can get in it until you start asking those questions. It's pretty interesting. And I totally agree with you. I think there's as much good as there is bad. I think there's some amazing things. It taught me amazing things. I went to Brazil for a 2-year mission, met some incredible people. I'm very grateful for that, but I couldn't agree more. Like, I feel like, getting on the other side, finding a different spiritual way and sharing and being kind and doing those and following those principles is an amazing way to kind of recover from that. I want to talk about your brand, Unbroken. I want to know, what is it that led you to that kind of concept? And I don't think we can have that discussion without talking about what the vortex is. Those are things you talk about a lot, and I think they're very important.
Yeah. So, the first off, for context, Think Unbroken came to me in the middle of the night. I had a conversation with someone, and it ended with me getting a text message from them that basically said, "You're full of shit. You're still broken." It was a disagreement. It was nonsense, right? And I was like, man, I've heard this my whole fucking life. This is all I've ever heard. Every time somebody doesn't follow the status quo, every time somebody disagrees with somebody, like they go, you're broken, you're broken. I'm like, that's not me. That's just not who I am. That's not how I think. And it was like, boom, lightning bolt moment, right? And that was 4.5 years ago. Vortex is this place, man, it's the darkness, right? It's that part of us where we're trapped. We're stuck in our own way. We're being so incredibly unkind to ourselves. We're burying ourselves before we even have the opportunity to walk. It's in that place where all of the things that have happened to us, we allow to dictate our future. We effectively play the victim role, right? It's easy to do that. I've been there. I've done that. I'm not shaming people. And being in that vortex, I think, is the most dangerous place for a human being to be, because that's where it gets bad. That's where you turn to drugs and alcohol and sex and, all the addictions and vices that we have. That's where you put a gun in your mouth. That's where pain is. And it's easy to be in that place because I think, in part, whether we want to admit it or not, the human experience is filled with suffering, right? It's filled with suffering. It's filled with pain. It's filled with struggle. It's filled with strife. And the more that we let that bury us, the deeper we get into that vortex. But I feel like when you understand a couple of different things, one being that you have the ability to curate your life. You're the arbiter of your future. I talk about this idea of being the hero of your own story, where I mean that in a literal sense. Dude, I should be dead or in jail, but I'm here talking to you because I made decisions along the way that brought me to this moment. I am not special. I am not an anomaly. I promise you. I don't know fucking anything you don't know. I'm just stubborn. Right? That's probably my greatest trait and my greatest flaw. And so in that stubbornness and in the decisions that I've made to lead to this moment, it's very much come to this place where the only thing I think about every day is, how do I make my life different? And I don't think it's always better, right? People are always like, make it better, make it like, what's the measurement for better? I don't know what that means. But if I can make my life different, if I can just like move forward 1 degree in the opposite direction and towards what it is that I believe I'm capable of doing, then I start to move out of that thing called the vortex, right? My therapist told me something that I carry with me that I will never forget till the day I die. Change only happens when we make change happen. And action is the way that we create massive change in our life. And so when you're in this darkness, you're at the depths, you don't want to get out of bed, start going for micro wins. Start thinking about the things that you can do in the moment, right? Maybe it's time to turn off Netflix and take a shower. Maybe it's time to brush your teeth. Maybe what you need to do is not smoke that cigarette. Maybe you need to read that book, right? There's so many different things that we can do in our day-to-day lives that can help start to create and build momentum, because momentum is ultimately how you get out of the chaos of life and build into what you want. And I know this from my own personal experience. It takes as much effort to destroy your life as it does to build your life. And when you really understand that, like when you measure that and you go, fuck, man, all this energy I'm using to make my life a mess, I could be using to make my life better. And then understanding that maybe a big reason why you don't know how to do this is because as we grew up, especially if you come from a traumatic state, but maybe even if you didn't, the only thing that we've ever known and understood is that what we have to do is turn off our intuition as a parameter of safety. What I mean by that is we're communal species, right? As human beings, we need community. And the moment you're ostracized out of the community, it becomes dangerous. But here's what happens when you're young and you're like, I'm going to wear this shirt because I think it's cool. Or I talk about this band because I like them. Or I want to eat this food or cut my hair this way or wear those sunglasses or buy that whatever. And everyone around you is like, that's stupid. That's dumb. Why would you do that? Who do you think you are? Right? And you slowly start to notice the more you tap into your intuition, the more people push you away. Right? That is not necessarily intentional from their standing. Right? And so then you're in this position where maybe that's reinforced in your home. I was not allowed to be myself at home. I was not allowed to be me. Okay. And so every time that I did, there was pain, there was punishment, there was torment, there were ramifications. I remember one time I even said a word incorrectly, and I almost went to the hospital because of what happened after.
Wow.
And so you learn to turn off who you are. You learn to be quiet. You learn to hide. And then what starts to happen is you're in school and you're color the moon purple. And the teacher goes, that is not how you color the moon purple, Casey. And you learn to turn yourself off. It is a defensive mechanism for survival. And so you find yourself now at 24, 36, 52 years old, and you're like, I have no idea how to be me. So of course your life is going to be chaotic because you've never had the space to figure out who you are. And this is the hard part. And this is the thing that people need to hear that they don't want to hear. You're not a child anymore. And that means that you have to take responsibility for what's next in your life. That doesn't make you culpable for the things that you've been through. It's not your fault that bad things happen to you, but it is your responsibility, whether you like it or not, to change your life into what you want it to be. It's like this, man. If every single day you walk outside and there's a bunch of garbage in your front lawn and you choose to step over it, that garbage is still going to be there when you come home. It's your house. Even though the garbage isn't yours, you got to clean it up. Mm. And so as you're on this journey and you're moving through this place and you're like, but I don't know how to take care of myself. I don't know how to be myself. I don't know how to show up. I don't have any self-esteem. I don't have any confidence. I don't have any self-belief. I don't have what I see other people have. Guess what? I didn't either. A lot of people haven't. And they've made choices and decisions along the way to build that, to create that, to foster that, to grow that, to make that come to reality and to fruition. And here's what it happens. Here's where it begins. You see, I say this all the time. Mindset is everything. But what does that actually mean? The first thing I teach my clients when I coach them, it's the same thing I'm going to teach you right now. And I want you to grab a pen and a piece of paper and write this down. This is the most important thing you will ever learn from me, ever. You're going to write this down and you're going to repeat this to yourself every single day till the point you convince yourself it's fucking true. It's this. I am the kind of person who is kind to myself. I am the kind of person who is kind to myself. The reason this matters is because right now, and this is the vortex, this is the crux of it, you are saying things to yourself that if you said to me, I would punch you in the face for, right? And you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why would I destroy myself? Oh, correlation and causation. Maybe it's the fact that this is how the environment treated me till this moment, and so I treat myself this way. When you understand this concept, what you think becomes what you speak becomes your actions, and your actions become your reality. Then you start to understand this. If you are moving in this world of saying to yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not capable enough, that will be how you move in the world, and thus that will be your reality. If you start through the narrative of I am the kind of person that is kind to myself, then you start to move towards that in your actions. And on a long enough timeline, that also can become your reality. Again, this comes back to this idea. It takes as much energy to build your life as it does to destroy your life.
Wow. Dude, this is absolutely amazing. I did take the time to write that down. I absolutely love it. You're totally right. The way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't talk to anybody that same way. It's crazy. And only when you become aware of it can you then externalize it, and then maybe, find a technique, like envision yourself as a child, or envision, what would you say to your loved one, if they did the same thing. Like, of course you would be really kind to them. And I just have to say, Michael, like, I'm sold on all of this. You've got me convinced, and I'm so excited to start this process tomorrow. What would you say to that?
I would say that this process is a process. Look, here's the truth. I think that it takes as long to heal as it does from the moment that you figured out that you need to heal, right? And I look at my life and I go, okay, cool. I got serious about this journey when I was 26. All right, I got 26 years to go, right? So I'm a decade in, I got some space to go. There's some time to go still, right? And I think that you have to understand, like, when you step into this, having grace for yourself is very, very important. And the reason that I say that is because you're going to fuck up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things where you're like, I can't believe I did that. I've been doing all this work. I've been going to therapy. I've been listening to the podcasts. You're going to make mistakes. It's a part of the human experience. But the goal is to use those as data and to measure them against how you will not perform in the world again and to not destroy yourself over it. But with that data, once you learn it, the thing that you have to carry with it is the understanding that the first time is a mistake and the second time is a decision. So the decisions that you make are everything in this game of life. Everything that you do matters. And so as you're in this and as you're going through it, keep in mind that you're going to make right mistakes and you're going to make wrong mistakes and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to do things that don't matter and you're going to do things that do matter and things that create massive change and momentum in your life. And on the way up, there's going to be some back steps. It's fine. You don't have to destroy yourself for it, but you do have to keep moving forward.
How do we get our tomorrows to turn into todays? How do we stop pushing this off and say, oh, I'll do this, it'll start on Monday, or diet always starts on Monday. Like, how do we understand that, like, if you keep waiting for tomorrow, you're going to be waiting a really long time.
Yeah, it's easy. You're going to die.
Yeah.
Like, think about this. If you change your relationship, if you reestablish your relationship with death and time, you will create urgency in your life. I could die fucking right now, dude. Literally. People say this, but I don't think people hear it when it's being said. You're not promised anything. You're not promised tomorrow. My best friends are not here anymore. The people I grew up that I love, that were my brothers, they are gone, right? I've had a gun in I know what that's like to be on the edge and like see that moment of like, fuck, man. And when you think about life like this, which is how I think about it, the number one fear that I have, I'm not scared, Casey, like when people say they're not scared of anything, I think often they're full of shit. I'm not scared of anything. Nothing that can happen in my life can be worse than what I've already experienced, except one thing, death, right? And so I measure the only fear in my life as being on my deathbed and having regrets. You hear this all the time, people who are on their deathbed, people who are elderly, who cannot function anymore, who are heading into whatever is next after this life, if there is anything. And the number one thing that they say is, I have a regret about this thing I didn't do. And that to me is terrifying. That's more terrifying to me than anything on planet Earth. And so when you change your relationship with time and death, stop waiting for tomorrow and understand your life could literally be different right now. You could make a decision right now that changes everything, but you're scared. And guess what? The only way that you ever move through fear is by facing it. I'm scared every day. I'm scared of everything. Every time I get on a podcast, every time I get on a stage, every time I write a book, every time I coach people, there is fear. But you do it anyway, because guess what? Nobody's going to do it for you. There's no Disney moment and nobody's coming to rescue you. If you want to create a life that you're proud of at the end of the day, you are going to have to step through the things that you're scared of. But you can do that with community. You can do that with support. You can do that with people around you. You don't have to do it alone, but you do have to do it, or you have to shut the fuck up. That's a hard truth. And I know that's going to rub people the wrong way. And I'm okay with it, because the reality is that if you want to have the life that you want to have, my words won't matter anyway. You'll do what you need to do.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if it rubs somebody the wrong way, just think like it's equal parts empowering. I mean, I'm reading this book right now. I highly recommend it, called 4,000 Weeks. And 4,000 weeks is like a normal lifespan. And you think about that, you're like, holy shit, that's not that many weeks. Like, what am I doing? I better get to work, like pursuing my dreams and my hopes and my destiny, because you're right. Like, I'm not going to be on my deathbed thinking like, oh, I really regret, trying and starting my own business, or I really regret having more time with my kids or whatever. Like, the hourglass is running. And if you had an upbringing like yourself, those 4,000 weeks are not guaranteed anyway. Like, you're right. An anvil could fall on my head right now. It's really important to contemplate, to be really thoughtful about how you want your life to go, because you're not guaranteed anything. You're absolutely right. I love that. I would love for you to tell us about the importance of making promises, especially to ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's everything, but I think people make promises that are just not realistic, right? And I think that this is a slow build, right? And we are only capable of lying to ourselves, right? That's what's really interesting. That thing that's keeping you awake at night, like that's often the thing you need to be dealing with. We say, and this comes back to that idea about tomorrow. Man, I'll do it tomorrow. I promise myself I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Well, guess what? Every time you break a promise to yourself, you are losing integrity. Every single time. And here's what's hard about this. We're used to it. We've allowed ourselves to do this, to go, next time, right? I used to drive to the gym after work, and there was a McDonald's in the parking lot and a bar, strategically placed, of course. And I would smoke a cigarette and walk into McDonald's and then go over to the bar and then walk back to my car and go, tomorrow I'll go to the gym.
Wow.
And then what happened is months went by, months and months and months. Same thing, dude. I would do this 5 days a week, like no bullshit.
Wow.
When I had that moment that I looked in the mirror and I said, what are you willing to do to have the life that you want to have? And I said, no excuses, just results. I meant it. And in that, what I really came to understand is that I had to stop negotiating with myself, right? You're breaking promises because you're negotiating with yourself. Life is very binary. Life is very yes and no. There is space for gray area. I will never argue that. But as a whole, life is binary. And thus, your decisions must be binary. Either I am going to do this or I am not going to do this. It cannot be maybe tomorrow. It cannot be shoulda, coulda, woulda. It has to be yes or no. Why? Because that's how you create change in your life. That's how you make decisions. It's yes or no. And so what happens is that when people are in this space of making promises to themselves, they give themselves too much gray area. They go, I missed it today, so I'll do it tomorrow. Every time that you do that, you are breaking an agreement with yourself. You are losing integrity with yourself. You want to build yourself into what's next. You have to do hard things. And those hard things, as much as we wish it wasn't true, mean that you have to stop negotiating with yourself. You have to do the hard thing anyway. And look, 99% of the time on the backside of the hardest decisions we ever make in our life is something beautiful, right? Something great. But you're not going to know if you don't walk in. And so that's what I think. Like, and let me say this too, in terms of promises, the scope and the scale is often too big when we're starting this. I promise I'm going to go to the gym 37 times this month. Well, you ain't been to the gym in 5 years. What if you just went once? Can we maybe start there? You know what I mean? And so I think that, again, this idea of momentum and building micro wins, like that's how you start to get to the bigger things. Because I look at the goals and the things that I've promised myself I'm going to do in my life today. And I go, well, this all started at one. Like I had to do one thing first and then build momentum to get to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Right. And so maybe your promises are a little bit too big, or maybe you're just not putting in enough effort. You're the only one who knows the truth.
Man, that's perfect. I love that. We give the same advice to our clients as well. If you get a small win, something that you think is so incredibly easy and simple, and you can do it, you're more likely to get a win the next day. and the next day and the next day, and then maybe 2 wins, or then maybe a bigger win. Like it builds on itself, like you said. And I don't think a lot of people realize it. That's such a great point, and I'm so glad you brought that up. It's funny you mentioned McDonald's, dude. You took me right back to like when I was 18. On Mondays, it was like Big Mac Monday. You could buy a Big Mac for $1. I can still taste it, and like, you know, the texture is already like it's like soft and mushy, almost like pre-chewed kind of thing. It's like an emulsion of salty, pickly, mustardy goodness. Like we lost McDonald's as a show sponsor, but it took me right back there. That's so funny. I want to ask you about the component of podcasting. Why did you decide to podcast? And I have a follow-up question to that, which is, why do you podcast so frequently? You release episodes a few times a week. Why do you decide to do so many?
Yeah. So first off, I started my first podcast in 2016. It was actually under another company that I dissolved. And so I actually always loved podcasts. I started listening to podcasts like as soon as they became a thing. I was an early adopter because I was running a business. I was just sitting at home. And then I was like, oh my God, there's like business people like Pat Flynn, like John Lee Dumas talking about this stuff. Like, great free education, right? I love learning, dude. I'm obsessed with learning. And so I had my first podcast back then. And then I kind of just dilly-dallied around with this one until a couple of years ago. And then I was like, I'm going to get serious about this. And I wanted to get serious about it because I know that I could bring massive value to people's lives. I say this all the time. You could listen to my podcast and you would never, it's free. It costs $0. You would never have to buy a book. You would never have to buy a course. You would never have to do coaching with me. Nothing. It's all there. And the reason that I do it with such frequency, which it will go to a daily show, I'm building a backlog right now to be able to do that with my team. And the reason that I want to do that is because every day we're going through this process. I think Unbroken is a life, dude. It is a lifestyle. It is an everyday thing. And, you know, even right now we post 3 times a week and I'm like, nah, it's got to be 7. You know, and then it's got to be 14, and then it's got to be 30 times a week, right? Like what I'm trying to do in building out this podcast and multiple different podcasts in the future, it's about creating as much value as humanly possible for people to come in and learn things. Nothing drives me more crazy than a podcast that doesn't talk about anything, right? I'm like, what's the point? This to me is my library, right? It's something I take very, very seriously that I do wish I would have taken seriously earlier, but I was doing other things that I needed to take more seriously at the time. And so, you know, I've been lucky to grow this podcast, the Think Unbroken podcast, and I'm just going to take it as far as I can.
That's amazing. I love that. I couldn't agree more about podcasts. I've learned so much along the way, and it was so nice to be able to finally, you know, give back in a way, in a modality that meant so much to me. And recently, we kind of got like the same thing. Somebody said to us like, "Oh, you'd probably have more listeners if you released less frequently, make it like a weekly show." And I thought about it, and I was like, first of all, we don't do this for listeners. If I'm the only person that listens to this, I don't give a shit. Like this is the most amazing journey. I get to sit here on the carpet of a second bedroom in front of all my cycle gear, talking to people like you, world experts, top people, ask them the questions I want to ask and put it out into the world. And you're right. It's like a library, man. Like somebody asked about, weightlifting. Great. Here's 3 episodes we already recorded. What about diet? Here's 4 episodes we already recorded. What about trauma? Listen to Michael Unbroken. Here's an amazing resource that I can give to them that can exist forever. It's incredible. It's such a cool thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. And, you know, it's so funny too, is because like the more I actually listen to less and less shows now, but I re-listen to the ones that I love. So it's really interesting. I've actually started treating podcasts like I treat books, and I will re-listen to an episode multiple times. Because I'm just like, man, you can't learn everything reading a book one time. And so like, even like going back to The Truth, I've read that book 7 times, maybe more, because I'm always learning something new. Right. I've even read my own book, even though I wrote it like 4 times, because I'm like, okay, cool. Let me understand this maybe at a scale and depth that I didn't understand when I wrote it 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean? And so I think it's about information. It's about education.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, the books that I have, I only own maybe 30 books. I keep the ones that I love and I do reread them. But yeah, you're right. The Untethered Soul, I read that every year and get something amazing out of it. The Tao Te
Yeah,
Ching.
it's a great book.
Oh, dude, it's amazing. It's my favorite all-time book. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is next to me. I read that all the time. And you're right, like as you're going through different phases of life, you'll pick up different things along the way that you may not have been ready to learn when it was first presented to you. So I love that approach. You got me super curious. If you had to choose 3 podcasts to listen to for the rest of your life, what would those 3 podcasts be?
It'd be Impact Theory,
Great one.
for
Great
sure.
one.
Well, and I am a bit biased into that one. I would probably go with. It's a hard question, man. Nobody's ever asked me that, so I don't have anything off the top of my head. Rich Roll, I think he's a phenomenal interviewer and entrepreneur on fire.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link all of those at the show notes because those are all great shows. I haven't done as many with the last 2, but I'm definitely familiar with them. And I had heard some of their shows, and you're right, they're great. Oh man, what is something in your life right now that is harder than you want it to be?
Everything. Look, seriously, like life is difficult and I'm challenging myself every day to do harder things, right? Do another podcast, do another article, write another blog, have another guest on my show, figure out what's next, go to the next conference, get on the next stage. Everything's hard, right? It should be, because if it's easy, then you're not trying. You're not challenging yourself. I fucking hate when my days are easy, right? That doesn't mean I don't have days where I take care of myself, because let's be very clear. But, there's a fine line between taking care of yourself and taking it easy on yourself.
Yeah, I think what we've done as humans is absolutely incredible, that we can make everything so comfortable all the time. We can make processed food ultra palatable. We can live at 72 degrees all the time. It never has to be darker than we like or colder than we like or whatever. And I think it's just so powerful to put yourself in situations where you are uncomfortable and realize it's just a feeling. It's a passing feeling. Being uncomfortable is like being a little hungry. Like it's not a big deal. And you're right. That's the space. That is where the magic happens. That's where the money is. That's where your creativity flows. And you can get more comfortable being uncomfortable, and it's okay. I think that's wonderful advice. This conversation has just been incredible. Michael, I would love to know if you had one thing that you would want a listener to take away from this conversation and apply to their lives. What would that one thing be?
Here's the truth. Like, people go through these things and they're like, I'm by myself. Nobody else gets it. That is the most selfish thing ever. Here's why. Because there's 8 billion people on planet Earth. People have had this experience too. And it's your responsibility to go and seek community in it. And every day that you don't, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. And yes, it's uncomfortable to walk into an AA meeting. Yes, it's uncomfortable to walk into therapy. Yes, it's uncomfortable to do shit like Reiki. Fine. Doesn't matter. You do it anyway. Why? Because it's your damn life. And here's the other thing where people get stuck and they go, well, this was my life. I guess this is what it was supposed to be. That's only true if you want it to be. Because, and I wrote this in my book, though trauma may be our foundation, it is not our future.
Wow. Dude, that is beautifully said. Awesome. Michael Unbroken, where do you want people to go to find you, connect with you, and your work?
Yeah, I'm everywhere on social media at Michael Unbroken. And the Think Unbroken podcast is at thinkunbrokenpodcast.com.
Awesome. That's great. We will link to all of that in the show notes. My man, dude, the journey that you have gone on, everything that you've experienced, that you got out on the other side, that you were willing to face yourself. And as difficult and as uncomfortable as that was, you were able to pull through. And now you're doing something that I so highly respect that I don't think everybody does. And that's you turned around and you shared your message and are sharing your message with others and are helping to give people hope and give them resources so that they can also benefit from that. And I've certainly benefited from this conversation. I know our listeners will as well. So thank you so very much for everything that you've done and for sharing your message. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity Thank you for allowing me the space to be here and have this hard conversation. And especially thank you for asking me difficult questions.
That's what we try to do around here. We don't always pull that off, but we try. Well, thanks again, man. It's been a huge honor, and we are so grateful for you. So thanks again for coming on to Boundless Body Radio.